The next two videos are dedicated to keyframe animation in Blender. You will learn how to animate the robot arm using the armature and rig we've built throughout the course. We'll drag the controls around, creating keyframes in different poses in order to make the arm reach out, pick up a can of beans, and then put it on a shelf. The first half of this video is dedicated to preparing our scene for animation. First, we will reset the robot arm to the very first pose we had it way back at the end of part 1. Then we take some time to prepare the timeline and learn how to make Blender work for us by using keying sets and having Blender create the keyframes for us automatically. We will also add a bone to the can so we can include it in our animation. For those of you who just want to jump straight into the animation without all the prep work, that starts roughly 11 to 12 minutes into the video. In the second video, we will cover how to actually pick up the can using a constraint and then adjusting its influence similar to the way we did it in part 1. Then we'll finish the animation and build a shelf for the can to rest on. Welcome back to the Robot Arm Animation series. This is the moment that you've all been waiting for. This is what we've built up to piece by piece so that we can now animate the robot arm to pick up this can of beans, and we're going to have it place it on the shelf. I'm just going to show you a little quick preview concept of what that's going to look like and how easy this is going to be. All we're going to do is take the arm and move it over by the can, something like that. And we can go into our top mode here, and we can go into our front and side modes to manipulate this and position it just how we want. Just something like that. So that looks good. And then we'll clamp down on it like this without clipping into the can, something like that. And then we'll attach the can to the wrist like we did in part 1. And then we're going to take the arm and we're going to pull it over here and we're going to bring it up and put it on a shelf. We'll extend it out and then we'll put it on a shelf, which we'll add later. But that is kind of the concept of it. So you can see how easy this is, where we don't have to move each piece of the robot arm piece by piece and add keyframes to that. We are just going to use these controls. And we are also going to automate our animation to make the keyframes for us automatically so that we don't even have to do that. So we're just gonna make this super easy all around. So let's select everything, go back into our pose mode. And if you remember at the very beginning of the series, I think it was the very first video, where we lined everything up to the y-axis here like this, I rotated everything here in object mode. If we select the armature and then open up our transform by pressing N, make sure you're on the item tab and then transform is open, you can see we have our rotation at -43. That was this. So the reason I did it this way is so that we could reset this if we wanted to back to 0 like this to get our original pose. So that's how you would get your original pose. Now you don't need to do this. You can actually keep it here, and I actually kind of like this here, but for sake of demonstration, we can put this at 0, and you can see that our base is now rotated as well, which we didn't have before. So before I do that, I'm just going to undo, select this one, Alt-P to clear that parent, and we'll keep the transform. And now we can select the armature and change this to 0. Now I have to reparent this back to this bone. And as I've said in the past few videos, I'm not going to go button by button. If you've made it this far into the series, you should know how to navigate around. You should know how to go in and out of edit mode and pose mode. You should know how to go back into your resting pose and all of that good stuff. I still have the screencast keys over here that you can look at to see what I'm pressing on the keyboard and my mouse. But having said that, I am going to show you something that I've learned since I've been making the Robot Arm series. And just to show you that I am also still learning as I go, this is going to make your life a little bit easier. So before, when we parented stuff to the rig, such as this, which is not parented right now, so if I actually move the rig, you can see that's not following because we just disconnected that. So what we've done in this series is we've selected this one, we've shift selected this one, then we Control Tab into pose mode, and then make sure this bone is the one that's selected, and then Control P, and then we choose bone. So I'm not going to do that now. I'm going to just kind of undo all of this. Back into object mode. I'm going to make sure that we're still disconnected. Yep, we're still disconnected. All we have to do is select our armature and tab into edit mode and just make sure that the bone we want to parent is selected. So that's the only one that's selected. Then tab back out into object mode, select our base, shift select this one, Control P, and bone. And now when we move this, it should be parented correctly. And so this saves us a lot of time and effort hitting Control Tab to go into pose mode, which we don't need to go into. We just need to make sure that whatever bone is selected in edit mode is the bone that we want to parent. And then we go back out into object mode, and then we can just do the Control P straight away in object mode. Now we still have to select the geometry first and then shift select the armature last, but we don't have to go into edit or pose mode from here. We can just parent that straight away. And this then allows us to just select the armature when we go into pose mode, and then we don't have that outline around any of the geometry that is still selected. So it's just easier on the eyes that way. And it should only be parented to this bone, so if I move anything else, that should stay put, which is what it does. I just wanted to share that with you, that I learned something new, and no matter how much you know, you are constantly learning, and don't be afraid to learn. Don't be afraid to say, I don't know how to do something, because there's lots of things that I don't know how to do, and you just keep learning. Just keep adding to your toolkits. So let's prepare our timeline down here. So we've actually got two timelines. We've got the playback timeline down here, which we're going to just use the controls for. So just pull this all the way down, which you should have that by default. But if you don't have this dope sheet here, so let's say you have something like this, and you just have the timeline here, you can actually just come over to the corner here where you see the crosshairs, and then click and drag and pull up, and that's going to duplicate an area here. And then I'm just going to click here, and then we can choose the dope sheet. So that's how you want to make sure we have this set up here. I'm going to pull this down just a little bit, and we're going to make sure summary is closed here, this little arrow thing here, and make sure the sidebar is open. So if you see something like this, then just click this button over here, this tiny little arrow here, click it, and then it will open that up, and then we can just drag this here. Also, if you don't see this summary here, you can come over here to this filter and then check summary. So we're just going to make sure that's on. The next thing we're going to do is come over here and make sure that only show selected is off. So if I click this, then we only see the keyframes for what we have selected, but I actually want to see all of the keyframes at all times for what we're going to do today. And just a quick refresher on navigation here, I can middle mouse and click and move this back and forth like this. I can scroll with my middle mouse to go in and out. I can also press and hold Control, and then with my middle mouse I can click and drag, and then that zooms in as well. And you might notice this down here, so I can actually click this bar and move this back and forth. And I can also lengthen it and zoom in and zoom out using these handles on either side here. And then to move the timeline cursor, this is our frames, which determine whatever the current frame is. We can just click and drag up here, or just click anywhere on this number bar. Here's our current frame number. I can also click and drag here like this, or go back one by one, or forward one by one. And then we can change our start and end frames, which I'm going to change the end frame to 1000 just to give us a lot more room. We're not going to use all 1000 frames, but that just gives us room to play with. So I'm just going to pull this in over here, maybe something starting like this. It doesn't have to look exactly like mine, just get something to where we have a good frame range from 0 to 150 here. Okay, so I'm going to click this button here to go back to the start. Oh yes, and we can use this to play and pause, and then spacebar also toggles play and pause. So go back to the beginning because that's where we want to set our first keyframe. So we've got that set, but before we start animating, we need to actually add a bone to our can of beans. We're not going to add it in a separate armature though. We're going to actually take a bone from here and just duplicate it and pull it over here. So let's go into our side mode and we're going to tab into edit mode. And then actually what I need to do first is go to object mode. So I'm just going to come up here and go to object mode. We need to select our can. And if you're using the file that I've provided, then the can should have the origin at the very bottom, which is what we want. So then we can do Shift S and then cursor to selected, where you see the 3D cursor right here. Again, if you don't see the 3D cursor, come up here to your overlays and then check 3D cursor. Now let's select our armature. We can go back into pose mode and then tab into edit mode. We're going to select this bone here and then Shift D to duplicate that. Right click to cancel that. And now with that still selected, we can do the same thing, Shift S, but this time selection to cursor. And then it snaps it here. I'm just going to take the tail and then click and drag and then Z to constrain it to the Z axis and just drag that up, something like that. Also, again, remember we are in tweak mode. You can change that selection mode here. Tweak mode is the best to just click and drag things around. But now we have a bone right in the middle of our can of beans. Now we just need to parent the geometry to this bone. So for that, we have to go back into object mode, and you can see that it's still taking the shape of this one because we've duplicated it. That's not a problem. We'll change that in just a moment. So let's just tab into edit mode real quick, make sure that this bone is selected here, and that's the only one selected. And then we tab back out, select the can, shift select the armature, control P, and bone. And now it should be parented to our armature just fine. So let's go into pose mode, and now if we just move this, you can see this bone is only controlling the can. All right, let's change that shape. I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of the custom object, which is the empty circle. Just hit this X, and then it will go back to that default bone shape. Okay, we are ready to animate. Let's save our work first. The very first thing I'm going to do is select all of them, and then hover your mouse over the preview, press I, and then we have this list again. So we're going to choose location and rotation because those are the things that we're going to move. We move the location of the arm and then we rotate things. So it's only location and rotation. And then let's scroll up over here on our bone constraint properties, which I just realized we need to rename our bone for our can. So let's do bone can. All right, so let's select everything. And then with your mouse hovering over the preview, press I. We are going to select location and rotation. And you can see we now have the location and rotation keyframes, but we don't have the scale because we did not choose anything in the menu that has scale. And that is what we want. But I'm going to undo this because we're going to make things even easier. So let's come down here to this keying dropdown, and then up here we have an active keying set. If I click in here, I can choose the same location and rotation that we just used in the preview, and we can use that as our active keying set. And what that does is if I hover my mouse over here now and press I, it doesn't give me a menu, but it straight away makes keyframes on our location and rotation because that is our current active keying set. So whatever we have here, it's going to automatically just add in those keyframes. So that's just one extra step we don't have to do. We are also going to make this even easier for us to animate, and that is we're going to use auto keying. And this is going to make automatic keyframes for us when we move our objects. So I'm going to click this on, and then in the drop down, we're going to choose only active keying set, because we want it to make keyframes only on the location and rotation. So now if I drag my timeline, I'm going to drag it to 50 because that's where I want my next keyframe. You always want to drag your timeline first before you move your pieces. Because if I drag my pieces on this keyframe, it's going to overwrite whatever I have here now. So we're going to make sure this is on 50, and then we're going to drag this and just start dragging and placing it into the next position where we want our keyframe. And you see when I let go, I have a new keyframe. and it's automatically made keyframes on our keying set, which is perfect. So I don't even have to add anything or do anything else. I just have to keep changing this until I get it into the position that I want it. And I can go into 3D mode and click and drag all of my controls around like I want them. And then I can go into front mode and side mode to make sure it's all good. I don't want this to go beneath the floor, which is this green line right here. I can also go into top mode and adjust it here. So I want something like this. And I also want this one open, fully open like that. Okay, so now we've got our new keyframes on frame 50. And let's just go back here and take a look at what we have. So I'm going to go back to the beginning, and then we can press play and see what we have. Ta-da! You see, we have our new animation, and all we had to do is move a few control bones to get it into the position we want. We didn't have to move every single piece one by one. And the nice thing about this is I can modify what we have here now. So for example, if I come into side mode, you can see that when we play through this, the claw goes beneath the floor. We don't want it to go beneath the floor. So right about here, I want the wrist to be rotated up, pointing more towards the can of beans. And so you can see it added a new keyframe for me here. And so when we go back to the beginning, and let's just scrub, I'm going to scrub so we can go slower. You can see we don't have that problem anymore because we've made a new keyframe at a new position in between these, and it just automatically blends them all together. Awesome. So we are ready for the next step. And so we're here. Now, I don't want this to straight away start closing. So like, for example, if I come over here to frame 60, and then I move this into close, let's just go into top mode here so we can make this precise. I don't want to clip through. If I do this, you can see the geometry is clipping through the can there. I don't want that. So let's just make sure nothing is clipping. That's clipping a little bit there. There we go. Something like that. And we might even want to move, because this isn't touching on this side at all. So we might even want to move this. If I press and hold shift, I can just go into precision mode so we can click and drag and line that up a little bit better. But I don't want to actually do it here. So I'm going to undo that. Let's just go ahead and click this keyframe. Make sure all the other ones are white. And hover your mouse over the timeline, X, and then delete. I want to see where I need to stop here. We'll stop like right, maybe here, like this. And then I'm going to go back here, and we're going to kind of adjust this a little bit here. I'm going to hold shift down to get in the precision mode here. And let's see what that looks like. Okay, that's going to be a little bit better, I think, to grab that claw. Let's just manipulate this a little bit again here, like that. Good. All right, that's good enough. So right now, what's going to happen is it's going to come here and immediately start clamping down. But it looks kind of weird, so if you watch it. And actually that doesn't look too bad because of this keyframe that we added here. And then it clamps down like right away. But I'm actually going to extend this out. So I'm going to have it come here, stop, pause, and then close. So a really easy way to do that, we're just going to drag this out over here somewhere. We'll do it on 70, and then we'll take this one only, make sure that's the only one that's yellow, Shift D to duplicate that out, and we'll put that one at 60. So basically it's just taking this keyframe and holding it for another 10 frames, and then it starts to close. And then on the close, I'm also going to take just this one, Shift D, and hold that on another 10 keyframes before we start moving. So now this is what it's looking like. Okay, and so yeah, I like that, except for it's a little too fast. So from here to here, this is too fast. So I'm going to take these two here. So if I just box select by pressing B, box selecting those. So just those two, and then I'm just going to G to grab those, and we're going to move those another 10 frames here, and then maybe I'll move just this last one another 10 frames. So let's see what we have there. I'm gonna move this back, I think, to 90. But here, from here to here, this is much better. So it stops and then it clamps down. This is more like what a robot in the real world would do or how it would act. Okay, so now we are on frame 90, and now we need to attach the can to the claw. I'm gonna go ahead and save mine here. We're going to do the same thing with the can like we did in part 1, where we constrained it to the wrist and toggled the influence. But we'll do that in the next video, so when you're ready, head on over to that one.